There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space, and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. It lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Dimensions, a Twilight Zone podcast. On tonight's episode, we are going to be discussing Season 1, Episode 16, titled The Hitchhiker. The teleplay was written by Rod Serling, based on a radio play written by Louise Fletcher. It was directed by Alvin Ganzer, produced by Buck Houghton, music by Bernard Herrmann, Jerry Goldsmith, and Lucien Moraweck. In the cast was Inger Stevens, Adam Williams, and Leonard Strong. It originally aired on January 2nd, 1960. You can watch it on Paramount Plus, Pluto TV, and of course the DVDs or the Blu-rays if you have them. And if you don't, I suggest saving some money or asking for Christmas if you have a friend or a loved one that would buy you something nice for Christmas. Maybe a little, more than a $20 item, but well worth it for any Twilight Zone fan or aficionado, if you would. So I highly recommend getting the DVDs or the Blu-rays. You really can't go wrong. So, as always, ahead there are spoilers and trivia and everything else that you come to expect from this podcast, all 12 of you that seem to tune in to listen to me, and I do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart, but as you know, I will be spoiling the episode, so if you don't want to hear what actually happens and hear my synopsis of it and my thoughts on it, stop this recording, go watch the episode, and then come back and finish the episode of this podcast. And while you were at it, if you have any thoughts or comments about any past shows or any upcoming shows that are on the calendar, please feel free to email me at dimensionszpodcast@gmail.com. I love to get listener feedback and listener, tell me when the first time you saw an episode of The Twilight Zone was. Write me an email and tell me what your favorite episode is. Tell me any thoughts on an episode. Anything you want to say. Say it, write me an email and let me know. And with your permission, I'll read it on the air. So, with that, let's get started on tonight's episode with the opening narration by me in the absence of my friend Will Lastly. So, take it away, me. Her name is Nan Adams. She's 27 years old. Her occupation? Buyer at a New York department store. At present on vacation, driving cross-country to Los Angeles, California, from Manhattan. Minor incident on Highway 11 in Pennsylvania. Perhaps to be filed away under accidents you walk away from. But from this moment on, Nan Adams' companion on her trip to California will be terror. Her route, fear, and her destination, quite unknown. So, in and during the opening narration, we see that Nan had a bit of an accident. While on the road, she had a tire that blew out, and so we start the episode that way, where she's at the mechanic getting her tire fixed. And this episode was adapted by Rod Serling from a popular radio play that was going and making the rounds in the 40s and early 50s. It was a radio play written by Louise Fletcher. She wrote the play in the afternoons while her newborn was down for a nap. At the time, she was married to the guy that does a lot of the music on the Twilight Zone, Mr. Bernard Herrmann. She was married to him at the time, and she got the idea from this story, or for this story. Her and Bernard were going on a trip, and she saw this shabby-looking man on the side of the road as they were crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, and a while later she saw the same man again on the Pulaski Skyway in New Jersey, and it got her to thinking what an interesting story that would be if you kept seeing the same person on the road wherever you went over and over again. The original radio play starred Orson Welles, and as a point of fact, Louise Fletcher actually wrote the role. A lot of the dialogue in the way she wrote it was written in the style of Orson Welles' speaking mannerisms. So her being a friend of Orson Welles through working with her husband and working in radio as she was before then, of course her husband still being a musical producer that was used on a lot of television shows and radio in the 40s and 50s. She became good friends with Orson Welles and actually wrote this play wrote the main part for him to be performed on the radio, and it was performed several times on several different shows during the time that radio was still popular, right before TV really started to take off. Now, when Rod Serling adapted this into a television drama from a screenplay, he changed the role from a male being called Ronald Adams to a female named Nan Adams, and he actually named the character Nan in reference to one of his daughters. That was her nickname, which if you think about what happens in the episode is sort of strange that he would name this character after one of his daughters, but Rod liked to name people after people he knew or were friends with or had dealings with, and so this is just another one of those things that Rod did. However, changing the role of the protagonist from male to female did not sit well with Louise Fletcher, and Serling claimed he did it to add a little more suspense, a little more to heighten the tension because it's a female instead of a male driving cross country. And Louise Fletcher apparently did not care for that idea. She said that it was plenty suspenseful enough without having to add to it that it was a woman instead of a man, and she thought that sort of cheapened the whole idea of her story that she had written. But nevertheless, Rod persisted, and it was a female, because by that time he'd already bought the rights to the story, so he could do pretty much whatever he wanted to do with it. So as we join the story, we're introduced to Nan Adams, who has a blowout on the side of the road in Pennsylvania and has to get towed to a garage where the mechanic fixes her tire and sends her on her way. Now, the difference being this time that she is going to be followed by a shabby-looking man in a very worn suit who seems to want to hitchhike with her. She sees him again and again on the road through a series of in-the-car shots on the highway with narration where she says, I saw him again here and I saw him again there. And all the time she sees him, it's the same worn-down man in the tired old-looking suit. And in a lot of ways, the the scenes where she's in the car driving and she sees the man and she sees the man, and the more she sees him, the further she goes, the more she sees him, the more frantic she starts to become in the car, the more expressive her face gets, the more uneased and almost terrified that she becomes. Kind of gives me vibes of, it sort of reminds me of the opening scenes of Psycho, where the character of Marion Crane, after absconding with the $40,000, is driving across the country to see her lover with the $40,000 in her, possession, and she has this sort of paranoia of being stalked almost. If you haven't seen Psycho, by goodness, please do. It's literally a masterpiece of cinema, and certainly one of the greatest movies ever made. If you haven't seen it, my goodness, go watch it. It's excellence in filmmaking, and you'll see a lot of people in Psycho that appear in episodes of The Twilight Zone. So Martin Balsam being one of them, Vera Miles. There's a couple in there that also appear in Twilight Zone. So check it out. But this scene, these scenes of her in the car very much remind me of Marion Crane basically fleeing from her life on her way to greet her lover with a stolen wad of $40,000 in her possession. We then get to the titular nerve-wracking scene in this episode where Nan is at a railroad crossing and she sees the hitchhiker on the other side. The hitchhiker beckons her across the tracks. She goes to go and to get away from him, and her car stalls on the railroad tracks, and there's a train coming. It's bearing down on her. She can't get the car started. She looks, the train's coming, the car won't start, the train is coming, the car won't start, the hitchhiker's there. And it's just a very suspenseful, very tense, very just, well done, expertly shot scene with the train bearing down on her. She finally gets the car started and backs off the tracks just as the train rolls by. And, of course, she sighs a huge sigh of relief. The train goes by and the hitchhiker is gone. There is also a scene where she stops at a diner to get some coffee and a little something to eat, and she keeps she asks the proprietor, if hitchhikers were prevalent in the area, because she keeps seeing one, and he, of course, says, well, no, lady, they're not going to be here, because who's going to hitchhike on the turnpike? People are going 60, 65 miles an hour. You got a guy standing on the side of the road. No one's going to stop in the middle of nowhere, especially doing 60, 65 miles an hour just to pick someone up. So hitchhiking is very much out of the ordinary in that area, is what he tells her. So in her frantic and very fast-paced and very, very suspenseful story of trying to get away from this man who's hitchhiking on the side of the road, she runs out of gas in New Mexico, and she walks down the road to get gas, and as luck would have it, the gas station she finds, it's already too late. The guy that runs it has gone to bed. He lives at the gas, right nearby the gas station, but he is already in bed, and he won't get up to get her any gasoline, no matter how much she begs and pleads and cries. On the way back to her car, she gets in her car, and a guy in a sailor outfit comes up to the car looking for a ride. And Of course, she is a little wary, but she really wants the company. So she decides to tell him that, yes, I'll take you. I'll take you, all the way to San Diego. I'll drive you to the ship, if you'll just come with me and keep me company. And he says, you got a deal. And she says, but here's the problem. I don't have any gas. And the sailor said, well, there's a station right up the road. Did you try them? And she says, yeah, I tried him, but he won't get out of bed for me to get gas. And he was like, well, I'll make him get out of bed. And so they go to the gas station, they get gas, and they're on their way, on the road. Now, this sets up sort of the next phase in the episode, and it sort of switches tones a little bit. It goes from being a very suspenseful sort of play about a man, I hate to use the word stalking, but he's basically stalking this woman as the hitchhiker is, he's stalking this woman. And then we get the sailor in the car, and there almost seems to be a shift in tone in the episode of almost an idea of, will this sailor try to take advantage of her or try to molest her in any way or anything. I mean, the character of Nat Adams, played by Inger Stevens, is an absolutely beautiful woman. So, that thought would always, regardless of being beautiful or not, that idea of her being taken advantage of or being molested or raped or what have you, would pretty much always be present, at least in the woman's mind, if not in the viewer's mind, especially in a situation like this with a television show like this. Not saying that molestation or rape was prevalent on the Twilight Zone, but certainly if this were an Alfred Hitchcock episode, you would definitely be thinking something might happen to the woman by the sailor. And he certainly does flirt with her and make some advances toward her, and certainly his body language says that he is very open to anything that might happen. And even with her, she sort of clams up a little bit in the situation. She sort of kind of goes on autopilot, I guess you could say, and doesn't shut down, but she's very wary and very aware of what's going on around her. And then we get to the point where she sees the hitchhiker on the road, even though she has the sailor with him or with her, and she swerves the car violently to try to hit the hitchhiker on the side of the road, which of course the sailor is like, what are you doing, lady? What's this all about? And she says, well, I was trying to hit that man. He's been following me since Pennsylvania. And of course the sailor saw no hitchhiker on the side of the road, and he proceeds to tell her, hey, I didn't see nothing, lady. You must be overtired, or something's wrong with you, and he realizes, I think at this point, that again, no matter how pretty she is, something isn't quite right with her, and he would rather not risk his life trying to run over imaginary hitchhikers on his way back to his ship than to do the opposite of just hitchhiking. Again, how funny. She picks up a hitchhiker in an episode about a hitchhiker that she doesn't want to pick up. But here we are. So the sailor makes her pull the car over and stop the car, and he gets out, and she then, in sort of a bizarre twist, and I've heard other podcasters, other commenters about this episode say that she tried to use her feminine wiles to woo the man, and they're absolutely right. That's basically what happens. She basically goes from being a scared, frightened woman in an instant to being a sort of very sultry sort of, hey, we can do whatever you want. Just ride with me to California, keep me company. And I don't know if I care for that. I mean, I guess, like I said, I've heard other commenters say that, that it's kind of weird that she would do that. But in a way, I can see it because humans, we're all built with that. The very core of us is self-preservation. And, it doesn't matter if you're a sailor, if you're a, Marine, if you're a cop, if you're a firefighter, if you're an accountant, if you're a janitor, it doesn't matter. You all have that. Everyone has that self-preservation gene built in them that, yeah, you might risk your life to help others, but, you're still wanting to get out of there alive. You know what I mean? And so the self-preservation idea is strong here. And that's why I think the whole idea of her using her feminine wiles to kind of keep this guy in the car is not really a crazy concept. It's not really a crazy idea, because at this point she's trying anything frantically to keep this man or keep someone with her so she doesn't lose her mind, so she doesn't fall victim to this man that is trying to hitchhike on the road with her. And but in the end, it's all for naught, and the sailor leaves. He gets out of the car and he walks away. No matter how much pleading and crying she does, she couldn't get him to stay. So we reach the end of the episode where she finally, in sort of another, narration by Inger Stevens as Nan, decides to pull over and use a payphone to call her mother, because she figures that talking to someone that she knows, talking to a familiar voice, talking to someone that knows her would put her at ease and maybe give her the strength and the courage and the ability to finish out this drive to California, of which she's made approximately 2/3 or 3/4 of the drive already. So she calls her mother's house, and a woman answers, not her mother. And the woman says, "Who is this?" And she tells her who she is, and she says, "Where's my mother? Where's, Mrs. Adams? And, can I speak to her?" And the woman says, "Oh, well, Mrs. Adams is still at the hospital." And of course she says, "Well, what happened to my mother? What's, did something happen to her? Why is she there?" And the woman says, she's been there for about 5 days, or for a number of days, due to a nervous breakdown after the death of her daughter in a car accident in Pennsylvania. Nan realizes at this point what actually happened to her, and she gets back in the car, uncertain, basically, of where to go now. And she looks in the rearview mirror to see the hitchhiker in the rearview mirror sitting behind her, and he says, "I believe you're going my way." And that would be the end of the episode. So, for the closing narration, here is me. So, take it away, me. Nan Adams, age 27. She was driving to California, to Los Angeles. She didn't make it. There was a detour through the Twilight Zone. So, this isn't the first time Death appears in human form on the Twilight Zone. He appears in episode 2 of One for the Angels, waiting for Mr. Bookman to go. He also appears in Escape Clause, and now here. And he will appear again in a couple of future episodes. Now, again, if you listen to other podcasts and other commentators on the Twilight Zone, many of them have read synopsises or have compared this person, the character of the hitchhiker, aka the Angel of Death, I guess you could call him, to the boatman on the river Styx ferrying people across from one world to the other. And that is certainly apropos. That is definitely that's definitely a very astute observation, and definitely worth being considered. I myself almost think of him as a tour guide, sort of in the same vein, but not really, because he could have taken her at any time, very much in the same way that the Angel of Death could have taken Mr. Bookman at any time and one for the Angels. This guy could have taken Nan Adams at any time, past the time her tire blew out in Pennsylvania on her way to California. He could have taken her at any time in between, from Pennsylvania to when she ran out of gas, to when she stopped at the payphone to call her mother and then realized that she was in fact dead. He could have taken her at any time in the meantime, but maybe, just maybe, he was sort of trying to nudge her in the right direction as to what had actually happened to her in her life, or death, as it were. It kind of puts in, when you think of that way, it almost puts into a different perspective the scene on the railroad tracks. What would have happened had she actually gotten stalled and been stalled on the railroad tracks and wasn't able to get off? The train would have hit her. Well, she was already dead at this point. So that idea, sort of maybe him beckoning her onto the tracks was his way of trying to explain to her, like, hey, no, you don't have to worry about it because you're already dead. The train can't kill you again because you've already expired. So I kind of like to think of it that way. He's almost like a tour guide, and some people just take a minute longer to realize what's going on, than others do. Now, what I do find interesting, and it's never really addressed in the episode, but the sailor, the gas station attendant, and the counterman at the diner that she stops at all had interactions with a ghost. She was certainly deceased at the point that she picked up the hitchhiking sailor. She was certainly deceased at the point that she banged on the window of the gas station attendant's house to get her gas. And she was certainly dead in the diner when she was having her coffee and talking to the man about if hitchhikers, hitchhike on the turnpike. And I almost wish this would have been, if this would have been a little bit of a longer episode and could have kind of delved into that idea a little bit, that the ghosts do exist, and that the ghost, in this episode, that ghosts do exist because the sailor saw one, the gas station attendant, the counterman at the diner, they basically all had an encounter with a spirit, so to speak. Now, it all goes back to the idea that spirits roam the earth because they believe they're not done with whatever they were doing on earth, or they aren't actually done and they have to accomplish something. But Nan didn't really have anything to accomplish other than realizing that she wasn't alive anymore. And certainly the hitchhiker was trying to help her see that. And in a way, I wish that would have been kind of explored a little more. But I always thought it was great because she's basically a ghost from Pennsylvania on. She's actually a ghost talking to the mechanic that fixed her tire. So, that's just one of those things. It's a mystery of the Twilight Zone. One of the reasons I like it so much. And one of the reasons that I like this episode so much. This was a fantastic episode. It's not a top 5 for me. But it's certainly in the top 25% of the episodes for sure. Fantastic episode. I really enjoyed it. I really do like it. Well done on the parts all the way around, from the, ever lovely Inger Stevens to the sailor, to the gas station attendant. Everyone did well in the parts that they had. Most of them, of course, being very limited, with the exception of Inger Stevens playing Nan Adams. She, carried the bulk of everything on the episode, and she did very, very, very well at it, I thought. So, very good episode. I recommend you watch it. If you haven't watched it, please do. It's a very good episode. So, let's move on to, who was in the episode and who made the episode. Well, Alvin Ganzer directed the episode, but we already talked about Mr. Ganzer way back when he directed the episode What You Need, about the old man that had what everyone needed, and fantastic episode. If you haven't listened to my episode on it, go back, give it a listen. Very good episode, I thought. It's one of these, it's one of those ones that just kind of, you put on, on a dark, stormy evening and just watch it, and it's really just a good episode. And Mr. Ganzer will return to helm 2 more episodes, Nightmare as a Child and The Mighty Casey, and we will be getting to both of them in due time. So stay tuned, and you'll hear them as well. So, the character of Nan Adams was played by Inger Stevens. She was born in 1934 and died in 1970. She had 56 credits to her IMDb. She was born in Stockholm, Sweden, and she was a natural beauty and very in demand in the industry when she was in it. She was a very depressed person, and I will say, trigger warning, for those of you that don't want to hear about certain things, skip forward a few minutes and you won't have to hear about them. But she was a very depressed person who hid it well under a facade of smiles, warmth, and positivity. She apparently had a quite rough childhood, which led to a lot of the mental issues that she faced as an adult, and which a lot of people believe led to her untimely demise. So, she did attempt suicide in 1959, so not long before this episode would have been shot. That this failed attempt at suicide gave her a new resolve on life, gave her sort of a jolt to get her get her mind get her mind right, get her problems sort of worked out, and to give her a new vigor to get back into the business. From this resolve, she got of course 2 episodes of The Twilight Zone, various other episodes in TV, and some movie roles, and she also got the TV show playing the nanny, I think it was, on The Farmer's Daughter, which earned her a Golden Globe Award and an Emmy nomination. Sadly, though, after this renewed vigor in her personal life and in her professional life, she was found in April of 1970 unconscious, and was rushed to the hospital, where she died having succumbed to a deadly mixture of barbiturates and alcohol. After her death, it was discovered that she was married to Ike Jones, who was an actor, a producer, a screenwriter, and a black man. So if you know anything about Hollywood or American in general, in the late 50s, early 60s when she married him in 1961. If you know anything about that time in American history, the last thing career-wise that you wanted to be as an aspiring actor and model was to be married to a person of the opposite race, especially if you were a white person married to a black person. That was extremely taboo back then. I mean, people still, huddle in hushed tones about it today even. But back then it was definitely very taboo. And it was actually her husband, Ike Jones, who kept the marriage a secret so as not to harm her career by being married to a black person. So it was, some people might put the blame on her, but he was the one that actually kept everything hidden to help her out. And then after she passed away, he had to fight to get control of her estate, and when he finally did get control of it, he gave everything she had away to charities to help those people like her that were in need but couldn't get the help they needed. So he was a great person, and he, I certainly wish circumstances would have been different for them back then, because who knows how things might have turned out. But that was the world that people lived in back then, and here we are. So it's really just a sad cautionary tale, her life was. And boy, I'd hate to think what she could have done had she survived, had she lived. But we will see her again in episode in an episode in season 2 titled "Lateness of the Hour." So we will see her again. Now, Adam Williams played the sailor. I'm not really going to get into his bio here because I will go over it in more detail when he appears in season 2 episode A Most Unusual Camera. I will go into his bio then, but until then we will kind of skip over him for right now. Now, Leonard Strong played the hitchhiker. He was born in 1908, died in 1980. He had 66 credits on his IMDb. He was a fairly well-used character actor who got his start in 1942's Little Tokyo, USA, and ended his career as a somewhat recurring role on Get Smart. He specialized in playing Asian roles, and he had bit parts in many TV shows, including The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and The Magical World of Disney. Not a lot is known of him, but he passed away in 1980. So let's move on to trivia in this episode. So we've already kind of talked about some of it. The character of Nan Adams was named after one of Rod Serling's daughters. His nickname, Nan. In the original story, the character of Nan was a man named Ronald. As I discussed at the beginning of this episode, Louise Fletcher didn't like the idea that the gender was changed, but by that time there wasn't a whole lot she could do about it. Another bit of trivia that Alfred Hitchcock tried to purchase the rights for this story for $2,000, but was turned down. Shortly thereafter, Cayuga Productions, which was Rod Serling's production company, offered Louise Fletcher $2,000 for the rights, and $1,100 per rerun of the episode. So, of course, she took that, and the rest is, as you see on screen, which is history. Now, the voice on the telephone at the end of the episode, where Nan called home and was talking to a woman that wasn't her mother, but who was kind of caretaking the house for her while she was in the hospital, was the voice of character actress Elaine Audley. And, you know, that her voice is very, very distinct and familiar to, you know, radio listeners. Now, for the goofs, in the narrations during the drive, she says she's on Route 80, which, you know, we hear through the narration. But Route 80 doesn't run through Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, or New Mexico, so she wasn't on 80 at any point in those drives. After running out of gas, Nan is walking in the wrong direction. The sign says, you know, gas, you know, basically the opposite way of the way she's walking. Because if she's walking, you know, she's kind of walking away from in the wrong direction of the sign. So, there's that. Her car changes color and make when she's with the sailor and tries to hit the hitchhiker. It goes from a 57 Ford during the driving scenes when she's with the sailor to a 59 Mercury and a different color. So that's a little bit of a goof. In the very beginning, when she's getting her tire fixed after the blowout in Pennsylvania, she's in Pennsylvania, but behind her is clearly desert and sand, which doesn't exist in Pennsylvania. So, just a few goofs, nothing too bad. You know, minor stuff, but still worth a little bit of a mention anyway. All right, now, likes and dislikes. Honestly, I just really like this story. I thought the story was wonderful. I thought the direction was wonderful. Inger Stevens, Adam Williams, and Leonard Strong all did wonderful in their parts. And the pacing of the episode was really good. So there's really not a lot to complain about with this episode as far as what I liked about it. Now, the dislikes, I almost wonder if this would have been better served as an hour-long episode. We could have gotten to see, you know, the delve more deep into her mental breakdown, as it were, on the road, and kind of get more into the terrifying aspect and the slow burn of seeing the hitchhiker on the road every time she turns around. But I still think it was very, very excellently done. Now, if it were to be cast today, if Hollywood were to call me and say, hey, Bill, we're going to remake this episode, who would you cast as the parts of the people in the episode? And here's what I would do. For Nan Adams, I would cast Olivia Wilde because she has a very good ability to look to very expressive with her face. She can be very expressive with her face, and just to be honest, she's also very pretty, just like Inger Stevens was. So, you know, that sort of could lend, you know, not an homage, but, you know, sort of a similar situation in that sort of casting of her. Now, for the sailor, I would say Zac Efron, because why not? He's a good actor. A lot of people don't think he is. A lot of people sort of downplay him a lot, but he's actually a very good, very accomplished actor. And this could have been a fun little something for him to do. Certainly would have played off well against Olivia Wilde. And then for the hitchhiker, I'd love to see something akin to, I'm going to tell you, I would think I want big actor in a small role. I want Tom Hanks in that shabby suit. I want Tom Hanks with the castaway beard standing on the side of that road with his thumb sticking out. And I want him to hear him say at the end, "I believe you're going my way." I think that would be fantastic. I think Tom Hanks would be the perfect person to play the hitchhiker if they were to update this version of the Twilight Zone. Or this episode, I should say. If they were to update this episode, Tom Hanks should be the hitchhiker. Now, for the moral of the story. Honestly, I kind of think maybe Rod was trying to convey the idea that we don't really know how much time we have on this earth. Certainly Rod knew it after being in World War II and seeing the carnage that he saw overseas. It certainly shaped his life and certainly gave him a different perspective, which led him to writing, which led him to television and radio, which led him to the cult-like status that he enjoys posthumously for years and years and decades after his passing. So I think maybe this is a tale of you don't know how much time you have left here, so make the phone calls you can while you're still this side of the earth. You know what I mean? Or possibly he was trying to tell us that all of us have to face death at some point or another in our lives, be it in a hospital bed dying of cancer like he was, or being on a road seeing a downtrodden looking man in a shabby suit trying to hitchhike. Maybe he was saying that death will wait for us, but only wait for us for a little while, and we all have to face it at some point. So the more you run, the faster it's going to chase you. And maybe, just maybe, that's what he was trying to tell us with this episode. And with that, we have come to the end of this episode of the podcast. So to recap, I really liked this episode. I thought it was well done. Inger Stevens did an absolutely phenomenal job, as did Leonard Strong, even though all he had to do was stand there and look menacing, which he did wonderfully. I really thought he did well. And of course, learning in the process that Inger Stevens, the way her life went and the way her life was very sad, very heartbreaking to hear that. So with that being said, if anybody out there is struggling with mental health, seek help. There's no stigma in it. No one's gonna berate you or think less of you for getting help. So if you need help, get help. That's all I can say about that, is if you need help, get help. People want you here for a reason. You're here for a reason. Do what you can to stay this side of the earth. So with that being said, next week's episode is about an old man who gets killed by an assailant with one arm. If any of you've seen the episode The Fever, you already know what I'm talking about. So if you haven't, it'll make more sense when you watch the episode. So watch the episode and then tune in next week for my synopsis of the episode The Fever. And as always, I welcome any feedback you guys might have or you might want to give me. If you want to talk about previous episodes or you want to talk about upcoming episodes, Feel free to drop me a line at dimensionszpodcast.com. That's DIMENSIONS TZ podcast PODCAST at gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me your favorite episode. Tell me your least favorite episode. Tell me what you think about The Fever. Tell me what you think about The Hitchhiker. Tell me what you think about Rod Serling in general. I'd love to hear from you. So drop me a line. And it looks like the clock on the wall is telling me it's time to go. So until next week, be safe out there and take care of yourself. Goodbye.